Nexus friends. I wish I was there with you today, but unfortunately I am here in London. And being here has made me think about the founding of our own nation. I recognize that, in many ways we learned about the start of the nation is that people came over from England, they settled down, they began a constitution that was informed by the Magna Carta, which was actually earlier informed by, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, blah, 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 blah. We all know the history. But one of the things I'd like to invite you to do, since you're all in Washington, D.C., is to go over to Thomas Jefferson's memorial, because I think that there's something that is not really looked at when people talk about what it means to be part of this grand experiment that is America. Yes, that is terminology that many of our founding fathers used, this grand experiment that is America. If you go over to Thomas Jefferson's memorial, you'll see several things that he wrote in his lifetime. And one of the most poignant that I think will touch the hearts and minds of all of you who are searching for answers to how to deal with the many confusing things we're getting from 360 degrees around ourselves. Things that deal with economic situations, environmental situations, social situations. Our sociological, environmental, and economic well-being is so convoluted right now that we have a mess in a tangled weave inside all of our brains. And believe me, you're not the only one if you're feeling kind of drowning in all this information and your emotions are boiling at the top and you're feeling isolated and even depressed. This is normal. Actually, I'd say it's normal to be in a state of spiritual crisis. If you weren't, you'd be lacking empathy. Right now, if you go over to that Thomas Jefferson memorial, you'll see something that one of our founding fathers wrote. He said that it is his greatest hope that one day the thoughts that he and his fellow founders of our nation were putting pen to paper would be considered antiquated by their descendants, that we would have progressed so far that we would think that some of their thoughts were outdated and outmoded. What does that mean? That's an invitation from the founder of our nation, from him and his co-founders of the United States of America, to each of you. That's an invitation to take conscious responsibility in creating the nation that you want to see. What did he mean by antiquated ideas? Well, he owned slaves for one thing. They founded a nation that didn't allow women to vote, another thing. I could go on down the list. Many of our founding fathers were quite aware of this, and you can look back and see some of the wives of our founding fathers weren't too happy that they weren't getting the right to vote from the day one. Believe me, they sacrificed and fought alongside the men to make this nation great. So it's interesting that you're meeting today, the day after International Women's Day, and you're asking yourselves, what is the soul of America? What saves potentially the soul of America? Well, number one is taking responsibility for it, asking questions, being honest with yourself when something just doesn't feel right. Number two is speaking up when you know in your gut it isn't right. As someone that looks like I am, who's having to walk around with extra papers in Texas due to SB 4, Show Your Papers law, which allows anyone who looks like me, or basically it allows the police to ask anyone who looks like me for extra papers to prove citizenship, believe me, it doesn't feel too good. But when someone who doesn't look like me, has a different complexion, different amount of melanin in their skin, speaks up and says, wait a minute, that's not fair. That gives me faith in America. And it reminds me that it's my job to speak out for people that are not like me. Whether, I'm a bisexual woman, but there might be somebody who's trans. There might be a gay man. There might be a straight person. I was reading about a young boy who recently was given such a hard time that he was given disinfectant wipes and forced to rub ashes off of his forehead up in Utah because it was Ash Wednesday, despite explaining that he was a Catholic and this was important to him. These are things that we're seeing around our nation. And what they show is not just a lack of knowledge, but unwillingness to learn about each other and unwillingness to recognize our common humanity. And at the end of the day, the most powerful thing every single one of us has, not just for being an American citizen, but for being a citizen of the world, is to have empathy, is to have compassion. Empathy does not mean you agree with someone. Empathy means you're using your heart and your mind to try and understand what the other, whoever the other is is coming from. Even if there's someone on the far, far right fringe, Nazi-like, hating everybody who's not like them kind of person, try and understand where they're coming from. Right now, a lot of the racism in our country is stemming from people who were white, who were poor, who are wondering, why does no one notice us? How will my child be able to ever improve their lives if I can't compete because I don't appear to be a minority? I'm not saying that you have to agree with their perspective. I'm saying we need and we have a responsibility to each other in this nation to seek to understand their perspective. Because when we seek to understand it, we can begin addressing underlying issues and problems. Now, when we start talking about politics, we all get in different sides and we all have our own opinions. So the question about applying an exploration of the soul of America and the deepest spiritual journey that is America isn't about trying to get each other to each other's side. It needs to be about applying the compassion to say, your side matters to me. And it has to matter. Because if it doesn't matter, then we've already failed this great experiment. And we need to remember, this is an experiment. America was established not just on the Magna Carta, not just on ancient Roman ideals, but it was also established on the Iroquois nation and what they had in mind. And the Iroquois believed that both men and women, their original houses of government were men and women, advising the chief. Well, now women are beginning to raise their voices. Now men are beginning to appreciate it. Now all of us are beginning to remember the Native Americans of this land had something valuable to say. And we're having to remember it now more than ever as we face environmental crisis. And we begin to remember that when we care about the earth, we care about each other because we rely on this earth. Suddenly, even the atheist finds a certain amount of spirituality in the idea of being part of the whole. There is no right or wrong religion in America. But, yes, America's getting a lot of things wrong. We're demonizing the other. We're not seeking to try and understand. And we're not taking the time to really listen to each other regarding the minutiae of what is putting somebody else, whoever that other person is, through the hardest times of their lives. Maybe they're handicapped. Maybe they're a different race. Maybe they're a different religion. So I'm going to invite you today as you start looking and saying, what is America doing right? What is America doing wrong? What is the deepest soulful aspect that any of us can do to serve the good of our nation? And I'm going to emphasize, it's having empathy and compassion. You can fill the rest with data. You can argue to influence either side of the political spectrum. But without those two things, we failed this great experiment. But you have the power to ace it, to turn it into something remarkable.